Welcome to Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono, the esteemed former Congresswoman known for her insightful perspectives and vast experience. Prepare to be engaged in thought-provoking conversations with influential personalities, exploring a wide range of topics, from social issues, politics, and policy, to personal development, shedding light on important issues that impact our society. Now, here's Mary.
Hello, and welcome to Sagely Speaking. I'm your host, Mary Bono, and before I introduce my special guest, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Map to Action and CUSP, which is Communities United for Smart Policy. All of our sponsorship information can be found on our website at sagelyspeaking.com. I'm grateful for their support in helping to make this podcast possible. So let's bring in today's fabulous guest, and I'm so thrilled that he's here. Dr. Adam Leventhal is a professor of population and public health sciences at the University of Southern California Keck School of Medicine. Very important to note that that is my alma mater, and my dad was a professor also. Before it was Keck School of Medicine, but at USC Medical Center. So Adam is also an addiction psychologist and public health scientist. His research currently focuses on the risk factors for substance use among youth, the epidemiology of addictive behaviors in the U.S., and science designed to inform regulation of tobacco and other addictive consumer products. In addition to his own research program, he directs the USC Institute for Addiction Science. So let's bring in Adam and find out about what he's up to. Adam, welcome.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Mary.
Can you tell us a little bit about the USC Institute for Addiction Science?
Absolutely. Yeah, at the University of Southern California, we really got tired of how slow and unimpactful a lot of addiction research has been over the years, because a lot of times it feels like the scientists are the last to the party. By the time we're studying drugs like OxyContin, the epidemic has moved to heroin and now fentanyl. And so what we really wanted to do was redefine the way we do addiction research, make it faster, make it more impactful so it actually impacts people, changes policies, changes the practice of healthcare. And the Institute for Addiction Science is the infrastructure that makes that happen. And one of the key ingredients, Mary, is we bring together experts from all these different types of fields, whether you're a psychologist, a social worker, a psychiatrist, a policy expert, a pharmacist, even a computer engineer. They all have stuff to add to help us understand what is addiction and help us come out with ways that we can combat it and really stop the current epidemic and prevent new ones.
I mean, this is true of all public health, right? They always seem to be behind the 8 ball. But, you know, in this case, with these problems, is it a funding issue? Is it the inability to see a problem soon enough? What are the impediments to moving policy faster than we are in this space?
So the answer is yes and yes, right?
I like that.
Well, yeah. So, you know, one issue is, it's sad, but addiction is still one of the most stigmatized diseases out there, right? And so when any disease has a stigma associated with it, the funding seems to be lower. And it isn't until, addiction happens to someone's family where they really, really appreciate it. And sadly, the way things are going, more and more and more of us seem to recognize that we have a parent, a child, an uncle, a cousin who suffers from addiction and sometimes sadly lose their lives to it. And so really what we want to do is shift the script, right? We at the Institute for Addiction Science, and I just personally believe, we should think about addiction like we think about cancer, okay? If you have a problem, you tell someone, you go see a doctor, you don't struggle alone in silence, and you don't go somewhere for treatment where you may not get the latest evidence-based methods. And so this is keeping everything going. And, you know, our research infrastructure is slow because we get funding from the federal government. And sometimes funding can be very conservative about what they want to invest in terms of research. A lot of times it's sometimes ideas are too innovative and more proof of concept is wanted. And so because of that, it really slows things down. It can almost be 7 years between the time we have an idea that we want to do something that will change, the epidemic, and then when we actually get the data.
Wow, 7 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot of lives.
It's a lot of lives, Mary. You're absolutely right.
Do you feel, had we woken up to the prescription pill epidemic back in the 2000s, that we would have prevented this fentanyl epidemic, or was it inevitable?
No, absolutely. I mean, who knows what other epidemics could have happened in the alternate universe, right? If we were able to change that, because the drug supply industry, whether it's, Philip Morris selling tobacco, it's the cartel selling illicitly manufactured fentanyl, they're great businesses. They're very, very smart and will pivot. But I do think that we would be on a much better path if we hadn't had a whole generation of people get addicted to prescription opioids in the first place and all the devastating consequences that happened.
Well, you mentioned tobacco, and you look at this method and the big business that it is, and you need to look at the Chinese, not only with fentanyl, but they're following the tobacco model with hooking kids on these illegal disposable vape products that are, in wonderful flavors that are youth enticing. And so it's not a model that it seems to be that hard for people to duplicate any longer.
You're absolutely right. I mean, what's happening is we see this with all sorts of different types of consumer products, whether it's the new apps on our iPhones, or whether we're talking about kind of a marvelous piece of engineering in a modern electronic cigarette, which could have helped people if it was marketed and regulated in a way that was more conservative and fast, right? Because we know that smoking cigarettes, regular cigarettes, is one of the most dangerous things you can do. And the initial idea behind the e-cigarette was a way to get smokers off of tobacco and allow them to get the nicotine. Now, is it healthy to vape? No, but it is substantially less harmful than cigarettes. But unfortunately, the vape industry figured out that they could market this in a way that appealed to kids who had no desire whatsoever to quit smoking. They hadn't even tried any nicotine product. And so that's where we are, right? We're trying to put the cat back in the bag, just like many of the different types of epidemics that has happened. And we're making progress. We've seen a reduction in youth use of e-cigarettes, almost cut in half, I believe, since a few years ago because of some of the regulation that's happening. But we still have some work to do.
We do. And look, for the record, I have no beef for vape products being used for either smoking cessation or if an adult chooses to vape, it's his or her own choice. But I do have a problem with the Chinese deliberately manufacturing and exporting these into the U.S. for our kids to get hooked on nicotine. And I think there's a big difference between the two. And I like to point that out because, again, that they're deliberately hooking our kids is something that's obvious that we should stop. But let's go back to fentanyl and drugs. You've talked to me before about how fast the drug supply market moves again. And we'll have some law enforcement guests coming up on our future podcast. But it's whack-a-mole, right? Yeah. Today it's fentanyl or tranq or nitazene.
Yeah.
What do we do about this market?
Yeah. I wish I had a good answer. I wish I could say that if we did this, we would stop all new addictive agents from being marketed legally or illegally. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be new products that come out, and we are going to have to catch up. And that's just the way it's going to be, right? But we just need to do it faster. And we're seeing this now with the cannabis industry. Cannabis now and marijuana is still illegal at the national level, but because of some policy loopholes, what we're seeing is, the industry is very, very creative, and they've created these slight changes to the most addictive agent in marijuana, THC, and now they're selling it across the nation. It's called Delta 8 THC, and we're seeing that even in places where marijuana is illegal. And so this is just another creative step by the drug suppliers to pivot, sell something, and then we'll whack that mole, and there's going to be another mole coming. We just need to be faster with, what do you call it? I don't know, the hammer, I guess. Yeah.
The gavel.
Mallet, but yeah.
Yeah, the mallet. There you go. Well, I generally don't talk about marijuana, but you brought it up. And I've heard a lot, either firsthand or read a lot about the new marijuana we all know is not the marijuana of 30, 40 years ago. And I've heard a lot about parents saying that their kids have developed psychoses from today's marijuana. Is that a real problem?
It is a real problem. So we're still trying to understand from a scientific perspective, what is that link from marijuana use to having a psychosis? And so the symptoms of psychosis are things like delusions, believing that things are not there, hallucinations, hearing things, or seeing things that are not there. And usually those are part of diseases like schizophrenia. And what we're seeing is there are children and young adults using cannabis at high potency levels. Like, as you mentioned, Mary, we're talking 10 times higher per puff than what we've seen in recent history. And it's not just while people are high. The concern is afterwards, the changes that happen to the brain, and then that may be making people more vulnerable to these chronic psychotic disorders. So I don't want people to get scared and to say, like, if they have one puff of weed, they are like destined to develop a psychotic disorder. That's not the case. What we're seeing, though, is if you have some sort of a risk factor, like maybe your parents, and you have a genetic loading, and your parents maybe have a schizophrenia, or it runs in the family, then you just inched up your risk of developing it yourself, perhaps by using a cannabis product.
Well, I just want to say one thing that is pretty personal to me. And
Sure.
I was always anti-tobacco when I was in Congress. It just didn't make sense to me. And where we're losing ground is on secondhand smoke. As a non-smoker, and by the way, as an asthmatic, there's nothing worse than walking through a cloud of marijuana smoke. So with that, we'll come back in a moment with Dr. Leventhal to get off of tobacco, because again, I generally don't get into this battle. I'll continue with Dr. Leventhal in a moment, but first I'd like to thank Communities United for Smart Policy, or CUSP, for their support of Sagely Speaking. America's fentanyl crisis is putting unbearable strain on families and communities across the country. We need comprehensive action that stops the illegal flow of fentanyl across our border and provides our communities with tools like readily accessible naloxone to help save lives. Please join Communities United for a Smart Policy and continue the conversation on X and Facebook at CUSP Action to help bring an end to this preventable tragedy, which is a perfect segue to getting back to Dr. Leventhal. Prevention. You said that there's, no silver bullet, no magic way we're going to turn this around unless we can prevent people from starting in the first place and recognizing the inherent dangers about dabbling in certainly the illicit drug supply. But can you talk about prevention and your view on that in this whole problem?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So prevention is not only the most effective way to prevent someone from developing a substance use disorder and all of those risks that happen down the line, it's also the most cost-effective way. And so there's countless studies that show what's the most strongest predictor of whether someone will develop a substance use disorder and have all those different types of consequences, including overdose. Well, what we find is the earlier that kids start in life using substances, and that's any substance, right? That is one of the strongest predictors. So if we want to eliminate people from trying any substance, but if we can delay it, that is huge. And, the way we delay it, we have evidence-based programs. outcomes. So there's education, and education is much more modern than some of us older timers might be thinking of when it was about just saying no to drugs. We have much more sophisticated ways, including even digital apps, right, that can be more appealing and less eye-rolling and for today's youth, and making them want to not use drugs. And then, of course, we've been talking about it, the policies. Kids will be kids, and they will want to try new things. That's just the way it is, right? Especially when you're young, and those parts of your brain that are related to pleasure-seeking exploration are maturing way faster than the other parts of your brain, which happen later in adolescence and into young adulthood. Decision-making, impulse control, that's a recipe for a vulnerability to addiction, right? And so that's also one of the more foolproof ways, is if we have policies to reduce exposure and supply of particularly appealing products, like we were talking about the e-cigarettes earlier, and of course these deadly opioid products that we're all concerned about, the illicitly manufactured fentanyl and in pills and other forms.
That's what's so scary today, is kids don't have the luxury of being able to experiment. The fact is that fentanyl can be a one-time dose, one-time party drug, and it can even be the wrong place, the wrong time, and it can be fatal. And that's why the importance of prevention is greater than ever, to explain to kids, you just don't do this. So, I agree with you on the policy problems. I was frustrated in Congress because Congressman Hal Rogers and I fought for years with the prescription drug epidemic, and the lobbyists were right behind us saying that we were wrong, and other members of Congress were being educated that we were wrong, this wasn't really a problem. I would say that I'm happy to see that the FDA did approve a test. It's called AVERT-D, or Averted. It's a genetic test for a predisposition towards opioid addiction. It'll be interesting to see when that hits the clinical setting how effective it is, and I'll leave that to the clinicians to figure out how that works into their practice. Adam and I have talked before, so every time I say this, forgive me, it's because we've had lots of previous conversations. Yeah. But addictive personalities and genetics, again, back to this DNA test. How big a problem are we learning? And, again, this addictive personalities, genetics, stigma is all a big ball of yarn wound together that's hard to unwind to get to policies quickly and create effective change. But can you talk to me about addictive personalities? Every time you mention one, I feel like I have one. I know I have when it comes to things like shoes, buying shoes. Right. but can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so let's take it first and foremost. It's normal to want to feel good, and it's normal to want to try new things. And what we find is that people tend to inherit, either it's through their genes, sometimes it's also just the way we are raised in our early childhood can teach us things about, you got to be more cautious, you got to be afraid, or you got to take risks, right? And so both of those things happen together to really form what our personality is. And one thing that's critical to our personality is kind of how we deal with emotions. And that's one personality type, right? And whether you are someone who, when you just don't feel good, it's really hard to focus on anything else and it's hard to get over. That's one personality type. And then another personality type is kind of that bravery, let's take risks. Both of them are good, right? Both of them have positive benefits. On one side, we see people who struggle with emotions. They're empathetic human beings. They're wonderful friends who care. On the other side, you have people who kind of are creative, out of the box, risk takers. That's who we want as our CEOs, as our president of the United States. Calculated risk takers.
To a degree. Sorry, I have to interject there.
What?
To a degree on the president.
Oh yeah, that's why I say calculated, right? But if you're managing the lives of hundreds of millions of people, you have to have some sort of confidence and bravery and lack of fear. So I'm just saying, these are traits that are good for us, but with addiction, they can go wrong. And so in the wrong place, in the wrong time, the wrong context, getting exposure to drugs, having a parent who uses, having it sitting around the house. That's kind of the perfect storm, right? Where you have that tendency, that personality, which could be great for your life, but you take a wrong turn, you use a drug and you say, oh my God, if you're someone who struggles with emotion, I finally feel normal. Maybe after taking a prescription opioid, let's say that has very addictive and not knowing, I finally feeling normal. I've never been able to feel this way. And of course, you're going to want to use it again. So I think that's how things kind of come together with addictive personality. So I don't want people to think, oh, I have an addictive personality and I'm destined for a life of drug use. No, not at all, right? But yeah, it does make things a little harder and makes you want to be more careful, which again is hard for a teen.
Early on with opioids, and again, here we go, stigma a little bit, but The problem with opioids, or many of these drugs that people use and get habituated to or addicted to, you need to have that drug not only to alleviate your feelings, you now need that drug to feel normal. And I think that's what makes it so much harder, and I think people don't understand. And we talk again, a lot of parents don't understand this. You touched upon this earlier. When your child gets sick with cancer or whatever it might be, God forbid, there are so many resources and there's so much support, and the pathway, generally speaking, is pretty forward on getting their treatment. But with addiction, there's no great manual. People are working on them, but parents have so much work to do to understand, or let's say anybody who loves somebody with this disease, there's no perfect manual. And I always talk about the importance of seeking help, professional help, for professionals who truly understand the pathway forward and can be helpful with that. And first of all, I just want to applaud you for what you're doing at USC, Fight On. But I know that you've made a huge change just in the institution itself with how they manage this and how you all work together. Can you tell us about what USC as a whole is doing?
Sure. No, thank you. I appreciate the kind words. And we need people like you, Mary, who are change agents out there raising awareness and, changing the policies. So, that's where the perfect team happens, is when academics really, I think, fit with change agents like you. Yeah. So here at USC, I mentioned this a little bit before, but you'd be surprised how siloed different academics are from one another. We all have our ologies, right? We have the psychology, we have the sociology, and these things have been around for thousands of years, and they're separate, and they think about things differently. USC, I could say a couple years ago, is not different than any university. So, but the issue is that we really need an all hands on deck approach. We need people coming together and coming up with creative solutions across these disciplines, right? And so, if I'm a psychologist, which I am, and I say, oh, well, addiction is a reaction to trauma. And then a social worker comes and they say, you know what, addiction is a social justice issue. And then my colleague from the Price School of Policy, an amazing school, says, you know what, it's an issue of faulty regulation and ineffective policies, so on and so forth. I could say that. Those ideas are not mutually exclusive. They don't conflict with one another. They actually synergize, right? And so what USC has done is they've recognized that. And they said, you know what, we need to bring people out of their silos and bring people together. And what the Institute does is we are the glue that pull people together to collaborate, like a think tank almost, to come up with creative solutions to, help incubate new ideas and then take them into market, if you will, right? And do it much more quickly. And so what the Institute is we're not trying to replace your academic department. Yeah, you should still be in the Department of Psychology and the School of Arts of Science. We're your secondary home, right? So that you're not there by yourself being the only addiction person in the department. because that's the way academia is. We have, I'll just speak about psychology. We have our addiction person, we have our depression person, we have our anxiety person, and so on and so forth. Because they need to cover all their bases, right? That's like a liberal arts education. But we can do that, and we can also bring people together. And then, I also want to take a minute to also talk about our innovative education program. And we launched the world's first Master of Addiction Science, MAS, and we've designed it aligned with our model. And so it's a degree that integrates classes and professors from at least 3 schools, pharmacy, social work, and medicine. And it exposes people to the big picture approach. Cell to society, our students are learning about. So they learn about neurotransmitters. They also learn about the failed policies. And what we've been doing for years is training people in one or the other so they can't see the big picture. And so I'm really excited about that. And so far, our students have been loving it.
You should be excited about that. That is really, really wonderful. And unfortunately, something that's here to stay. Obviously, it's going to be a growth industry that we're going to need more and more of this, and certainly specialists who truly understand how to treat this. Last question I think I have for you is what I love, music to my ears with USC, but USC, just go ahead and brag about my alma mater, has some of the finest schools outside of medicine and liberal. I look at the cinema school and the business school, and do you reach out to those other fantastic schools, the Annenberg Center, and bring them in with their creative ideas on how to reach people, or is there still work to be done in that regard?
So the answer is yes and yes again. So, sorry, Mary. Yeah, so we do. And so it's just a matter of time and funding, I think, because there are so many good ideas. But yeah, we have people from the Annenberg School of Communication, which is, one of the nation's best schools of communication. And lo and behold, communication experts know how to communicate information about health and to educate people, right? I don't know. Why should I know in public health, right? And so in terms of messaging and PSAs, right? So yeah, there's definitely stuff happening there. Cinema, yes, there's more work to be done, but we have award-winning directors, including one who he wants to do a film about overdose to educate people. And he actually contacted us. And it's just a matter of finding the time and the resources so that we can leverage one of these amazingly talented cinema experts so they can craft a narrative in a film that will entertain you and will teach you things about, well, this is what naloxone is. If you see someone with these symptoms of an overdose, this is how you bring them back. So there's so much to be done, and I think we're not going to have one magic bullet, Mary. We just need to. It sounds like a bad analogy, but it's chipping away. We need to chip away from all these different sources, and collectively, that's how we bring the total number of people impacted by addiction down. Millions of people at a time through that.
Well, I think that is a perfect note to end on, and you give us great hope that it is going to be chipping away at it.
It is.
But I just want to thank you for your leadership and what you've created and your entrepreneurship, and you've helped me. You did a roundtable with us on naloxone access for schools, and I thank you very much for that. We're seeing some good policy change around the country thanks to your help, so thank you. And so I really thank you for joining us today on Sagely Speaking. It's a real joy to have you, and we're fans of yours and your work. We're a phone call or an email away if we can do anything to further your cause. I want to thank our listeners today for joining us, and I want to thank our engineer, John McMullen, who is a great engineer and also sort of the wind beneath my wings with this podcast, and my longtime friend, Kim Waltrip, who stepped up to produce this podcast. I really want to thank our sponsors who make this show possible, Map to Action and CUSP. All of our sponsorship information can be found on our website at sagelyspeaking.com. And if you have any thoughts, questions, concerns, or even compliments, those are okay too. Please feel free to reach out to us at hello@sagelyspeaking.com. And again, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for joining us today on Sagely Speaking with Mary Bono. Remember, wisdom is a journey, not a destination. For more insights, visit our website at sagelyspeaking.com.